Hello, everyone, and welcome to Management Tip Unpacked, our new monthly LinkedIn Live series where we'll help you make sense of your career, the workplace, and the wider business landscape. I'm Amy Gallo, an editor here at HBR and the author of the upcoming book, Getting Along: How to Work with Anyone, Even Difficult People. I'm also the co-host of HBR's Women at Work podcast. Joining me today is my friend Muriel Wilkins. She is a longtime executive coach and the host of the HBR Presents podcast, Coaching Real Leaders. If you haven't checked out this podcast, I highly recommend you do. She gives us a front row seat to real life coaching sessions with senior leaders who are grappling with some of the most common and relatable career issues. So I'm going to start off with a few questions for Muriel about career transitions, that topic for today, but we want to hear from you as well. So please share any thoughts, questions you have about navigating a career shift in the comments. So Muriel, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Amy. So great to see you.
You too. So let's start off. I want to make this as practical as possible for people. When you know you're ready for a career change, what's the first step in rebranding yourself?
So I think the first step is to get really clear. And by the way, this is a question that people often aren't clear on. They make the decision and then they're like, when I ask them this question, it's what is it that you want? Yeah. Because without knowing that, then it's really hard to align the steps that you take, whether it's from a career search standpoint or the behaviors that you might need to adjust or the skills that you need to develop that can then be aligned with that goal, right? You're sort of doing it aimlessly. So I think the very first step after you kind of give yourself a pat on the back and celebrate that you've made the decision is to get real clarity and specificity around what is it that you want. And understanding that even when you put that stake in the ground, it doesn't mean that it's forever and that you can't change your mind, right? Better to have something that you can then change your mind on down the road than to have nothing at all.
Yeah. I imagine a lot of people, and I've heard this, that a lot of people are, when they're thinking about career change, they're focused on what they don't want, what they're leaving behind. So I can imagine, like you said, most people don't know what is it exactly they don't want. But knowing what you don't want is as important, isn't it?
Yeah, it helps inform what you want, but I agree with you. I think that's exactly it. And not just in career, in other areas of your life, like we react to what the reality is and then say, oh, I don't want this, I don't want that, versus creating the reality that we do want. Right. So I'm all for don't react to the career that you have, learn from it, absolutely learn from it and help it inform you, but then create and envision the career that you do want. So that it then is, again, more aligned with what is actually important to you rather than a reflection of what may have worked or not have worked in the past for you.
Yeah. Are there any questions you ask your clients in trying to help them understand what they want? Specific questions to help unearth those needs, wants, desires?
Yeah, I ask a couple of questions. One is probably the most important one, and I think the biggest one that folks don't often think about is what's the impact that they want to make? And then where do they want to make it? And who do they want to make it on? Because oftentimes folks get caught up in, this is the position that I want, right? They name a specific position, or this is the type of company that I want to work in. But they don't think about impact. And I tend to think about, with my clients as their career being an expression of themselves. And so what is it that they're trying to express? What's the impact that they're trying to make without judgment, right? The impact could be on themselves. The impact could be on their family. The impact could be on their world. But let's be clear around what is it that you're trying to do from that standpoint. And then what that tends to do is kind of really open up the doors that there are numerous ways that they can get there, rather than thinking about it specifically in terms of a particular role or particular position or a particular type of company.
Right. Any other questions you ask them to think through?
So that's kind of the Uber one. And then when we get down to specifics, we do talk about things like, well, what do they want their life to look like, right? Financially, where do they want to live? What kind of environment do they want to work in? So again, to try to get them away specifically from just looking at it from a position, but thinking about everything that kind of comes with that package, so that when they do find a position or a role that they're interested in, they're able to test it out against a number of different variables versus just the specific role itself.
Yeah. I think one of the things I have often made the mistake of not thinking about, because I have thought about the things about the industry I want to be in, or the position, or the title, or the amount of money I want to make,
Mm-hmm.
is also the culture and the environment I want to be in. And
Mm-hmm.
it influences our well-being and our happiness so much. And
Mm-hmm.
yet it's also hard to describe. Do you have any thoughts on how to think about that aspect of a transition?
Yeah, in terms of the culture, I mean, this is where it comes down to probably the number one thing being what's important to you in terms of the type of environment that you want to be in and the types of values that you have. And is the organization that you're looking at, if you're considering one, does it have some intersection with your values, right? Like a lot of times people say, oh, the organization should completely reflect your values. I don't necessarily think so. I do think that there needs to be some intersection. So that you then get a sense of belonging there. And so what does that look like in real terms? How do people work? What do you observe, in terms of the interactions? Even how do they communicate with you when you're going through the recruiting process? That's a demonstration of probably what your experience is going to be like. So when we talk about culture, I like to kind of break it down into more elementary terms. Like, what is culture? Culture is really the experience that we have in a particular place. And in this case, what we're talking about is the company or the organization. So every touch point that you have with a particular organization is a taste of that culture.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be informed quite a bit. You don't necessarily have to be fully in it to experience it, but make sure that you're informed by the different touch points that you have and the people that you meet along the way.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. Let's think about the skills you need as well, because I think one of the things that hold a lot of people back is they're not happy in their career. They want a different career, want to move into a different industry, maybe want to move from a 9-to-5 job to being an entrepreneur, but they're not sure they have the skills. How do you think about acquiring the skills you need, and even rebranding yourself so that people understand you have the skills you need to make that transition?
I mean, again, the first place to start is what are the skills that you even need, right? And getting informed around that. And this is where I think taking the time to do your research in terms of the people that you speak to, particularly if you're looking to change careers or looking to change roles. You talked about moving from maybe holding a corporate position to then becoming an entrepreneur. Well, there's a lot of different skills that are involved in that, even if you have the technical skills for whatever it is that you're going to focus on. So doing your research up front to figure out what are the skills that are actually necessary to hit the ground running, or at the very least set me up and position me for success, are going to be important. Once you have those, then you should take inventory of what skills you actually have. And you can do that by asking for some feedback, looking at your track record and looking at your experience. And then if there are some that are really big gaps that you think are necessary just as price of admission, because that's what you really need, is just a price of admission type of skills, then I would say look to see if there are opportunities for you to grow them within the position that you're in or within the company that you're in, or if it's possible for you to grow them outside. So for example, let's say presentation skills is a big one and you don't have that opportunity in your career. Can you get involved in something outside of your company through a volunteer position, through a board seat or something like that, that then gives you some at-bats and some opportunities to build those presentation skills. And then you should also look for, wherever it is that you're transferring to, are they expecting somebody to come in with those skills from the get-go, or are they okay with somebody coming in with the expectation that that person will develop them over time? And will they provide the resources and opportunities for you to develop them?
Yeah. I find the idea of sort of taking inventory of my skills really daunting, just because I'm like, I don't know, I do this job in day out. What skills do I actually have? Do you have any practical tips for how people can actually do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very simple one. Ask other people, right? So, and this isn't just if you're changing careers. I mean, I think this is just a standard good career hygiene that you should get into, is asking for feedback. And there's certainly some good suggestions around how to ask for feedback. The more specific, the better. But just getting into even asking just generally once a year, sending out an email to, 12 people and saying, hey, could you list for me what are the top 3 things that you really value in me, that you see as my strengths? What are the 3 things that you think I have the potential to grow into and you think it'd be helpful if I did? And then what are the top 3 suggestions you have in terms of how I could better myself or improve myself or enhance myself in this area of my career? And you'll be surprised how people are willing to give you that feedback as long as you're able to receive it. So I think doing that, I think if there's specific skills that you're looking that come up as a gap in your inventory, then ask for feedback specifically on those skills, right? And you can even say it very simply on a scale from 1 to 5, when it comes to presentation skills, where do you think I am? And, and then they'll say, oh, I think you're a 3. Okay, so what makes you think I'm a 3 and how do you think I can get to a 5?
Right. All right. So for those watching, we'd love to hear your questions. For Muriel about career transitions, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. So we talked a little bit about skills, how to make the transition. You just were speaking about how to involve other people and sort of giving you feedback and inventorying those skills. What other ways do you want to think about involving those in your life, asking for help, getting support through this transition?
Mm-hmm. So I think it is helpful to have support, but you want to be very strategic when it comes to your career overall, but more specifically around career transitions, where you're getting that support from. Just because somebody is supportive does not mean they need to be your support system or in your support circle for this particular phase of your career. And so I do think thinking very intentionally about who are the 5 or 6 or 10 people who can actively support you as you move through this career transition is critical. And so who are those people? These are people who can give you advice and mentoring as you go through the process. These are people who can potentially be helpful in terms of opening doors or giving you access to opportunities or broadening your perspective in terms of the opportunities that you're looking at. These are people who potentially can give you the feedback and help in the skill building that we were just talking about. So you want to think again about individuals who specifically can help you in this transition phase. And when you go and seek out these people, you go and seek out and you ask them specifically, you invite them to be in this circle. Don't do it passively, right? Don't say, oh, can we grab coffee? And meanwhile, the person thinks they're just there to grab coffee. And you're thinking, oh, like I'm hoping that they can, open up a door for me. So ask them explicitly to be on that board of advisors, if you will, and then be helpful to them to help you. Make it easy for them to help you by being very specific about what it is that you're looking to get support on.
Yeah. Asking for help like that can be so daunting. And, I have this recent experience of setting up a launch team to help me with my book promotion, which you generously joined.
Yes.
And I have to tell you, I rewrote the email asking folks to join the team like 15 times because I thought no one's going to want to do this. I'm putting myself out there. And every single person said yes. And I think that's just a testament to what you're saying. When you invite people to be on this board of directors, it feels like you're making a big ask, but people want to help. They want to be involved.
People want to help because, think about it. When you asked, I know when you asked me, it was like, oh, I'm seen. She wants me to be on her team. Everybody wants to be seen, right? In some way. And asking for help can feel like a very vulnerable act, and it takes courage, which is okay. Now, what I will say is be strategic and intentional and sort of think about it from a reciprocal standpoint and don't wait till the last minute to ask. Right? You want to cultivate that over time. My mom used to say to me all the time, it's one of the pieces of advice that has carried me very far in my career. And she used to say it to me, even as a young kid, like, don't call your aunt just when you need her for something, right? Call her for her birthday, call her like just to check in on her, just to see how she's doing. And I think the same goes when you're culturing your network for anything. And in this particular case, don't wait till you're actually in the career transition phase to say, who should I ask? Let me, call somebody that I haven't touched base with in 10 years or somebody who I've never met and had a relationship with. So I think that's what makes it even more open, is to really leverage the equity that you've built over time with individuals.
Yeah, I'm thinking about a colleague who I've known almost as long as you, about 15 years, and she had over the years had always reached out with small questions about her career, and then right at the start of the pandemic, we were all so overwhelmed and emotionally, sort of lost, and she reached out and she said, "Do you have time for a career conversation? I know it's a weird time." And I said yes, even though I really felt like I had no time. And I remember walking around my neighborhood with my handmade mask, having a conversation with her. And it was the most enjoyable moment in that first month of the pandemic because I felt like I could be useful. I gave her some, and she was really making a big career transition from a job she had had for 12 years to an entirely new field. And it was fun for me. So that's a PSA to everyone out there.
Yes.
Ask people, cultivate the relationship, like you said, but ask people, even when you think it might be an inconvenient time, the worst they can say is no.
That's right. And I also think it's very helpful if you, as you're thinking about who to ask yourself, is this somebody that you would be willing to help? Because if you go in with the attitude of, at some point, I will be giving it back to this person, or I already have, like, this is somebody that I would help. Even if they don't help me, I'd be willing to help them. Then it actually makes it a little easier that you're just kind of getting into a relationship and a pattern of reciprocity rather than it being like networking, right?
Right.
So that's a way to think about it as well to make it more comfortable.
Yeah. All right. I have like 45 more questions, but I want to get to listener questions,
Sure.
viewer questions rather, because I think we've gotten some great ones. So I really wanted this question from Samuel in Colombia. So he's an environmental engineer and he wants to transition into finance. So he started a corporate finance degree, but lacks experience in that sector. So he said it's hard to find a job. His question is, what would you recommend I do to speed along the process?
So I don't know a ton about environmental engineering, but my guess is that somewhere in your company, there is a finance role or there are finance activities that need to happen, even potentially in your division, right? It makes me think about one of the first roles that I had coming out of school, where I was in a marketing position, but I was also given the responsibility to take care of what was really an administrative task, but was the budgeting for my division. And so that gave me experience from a finance standpoint. Now, I didn't want to be a finance person, but it did give me that experience. So I think the first place to start is to be creative, to see if you can get some on-hand finance experience, even if it feels like it's, beneath you, but just to kind of get your foot in on that type of experience within your role and then within the company. Then I think the second way to look at it is there a possibility for you to move to a different company that focuses on the same things that you're focused on now, meaning maybe it's an environmental engineering company, but you're moving there in a finance position, right? So what you're bringing to the table is the technical knowledge that you have about the field, but you now want to express it through finance. So that would be the second thing. I think the third is not to necessarily transition directly into finance right away, but is there another role, another stepping stone that could then move you into finance? So what are particular roles like that? Something like strategic planning and analysis, where the numbers are involved, but you're not directly in finance. Something where you have a managerial role, again, where you have budgeting responsibilities. So even being more of a chief of staff, where you actually get to see those types of activities taking place. So starting to think about, are there stepping stones that I can take that might not necessarily put you in the finance division, but still give you exposure to those types of activities that could eventually lead to you being in finance.
I love that. And I'm a big fan also of finding someone who's done the thing that I want to do. So maybe there's Samuel, maybe there's people in your finance program, in your corporate finance program, who've made that transition, who are about to make that transition, or alumni from that program who you could contact and ask, how did you do it? What were the hurdles? Right. What helped, right?
That's right. And if you're fortunate enough to have somebody who is in finance and who's in a position of, hiring and power in their organization, but they are kind of a sponsor to you, they might be willing to just take a bet on you, and that would be great, right? Like, take the opportunity and say, hey, I might not have experience in this, but I want to learn. I'm hungry to learn. I want to perform. I want to lean into this. Would you be willing to take a chance on me? And they might not give you the level of role that you want. That's sometimes the trade-off. But at least you'll be getting in the door. So if you have somebody like that in your life, I would definitely leverage it as well.
That's great advice. Thank you. So we have another question from Seta from the UAE, and apologies if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. I'm going to just read the question. When do you know it's the right time to make the jump from corporate to entrepreneur? I have a great idea for a new business in mind, but I've been debating it for a few years. How can I finally move forward?
Okay. We could talk about this at length.
I know. This is a whole other show too, right? Yeah.
When do you know? So let me start with when you know. If you're in a state of ambivalence, if you're kind of like, should I do it or should I not? Then it's not time to do anything. It means you still need to kind of sit with it and do your research and ask the questions that you're asking. When you know. And I think this is particularly important as moving from a corporate position to entrepreneurial, because as being an entrepreneur, and I've lived both lives as a corporate worker and then being an entrepreneur for now almost 20 years. As an entrepreneur, you go a lot with your gut. And I think that moment of deciding it's time, it's informed, but it's an informed gut decision. And why? Because you're taking a leap of faith, right? In terms of moving there. So that's one. I think the second is to move to being an entrepreneur, you really want to think about why you're doing it. And so, because you're wearing two hats, you have the idea that you want to bring to life, and that could be your purpose and your passion. And from my standpoint, my whole purpose and passion is helping people live and lead with a little more ease. But then I have to ask my question. The question is my own business the best place to express that? Because as an entrepreneur, you have to wear that business hat. And what I find is that a lot of people want to practice and create the idea, but they don't necessarily want to also be the business person, and all that comes into play with that. So do you love both of those? And that is a big distinguishing factor that I think you really need to be honest with yourself before taking the leap and deciding you want to be an entrepreneur, to decide, is entrepreneurship the way that you actually want to express the purpose and the passion and the idea that you have?
Yeah, I love that. I have a good friend, actually from childhood, who was in a marketing role in a media company and really wanted to start a business as a master gardener. And she decided the way to do it was to ramp down to part-time because she couldn't afford the complete income loss, and try out. She took a course, a master gardening course, like Samuel, who's taking this corporate finance course, right? And then she took on 2 clients, and that was just like, okay, let me feel it out. And she's back to full time in her marketing role because she realized exactly what you were saying, is that her reasons for doing it didn't actually turn out to be what she was able to do. She loved gardening, but she didn't like serving clients, gardening.
Exactly.
And I think that's something to consider. We think our passion is where we're going to want to put all of our energy, but we have to think about how it actually gets executed in these entrepreneurial endeavors.
Exactly. And you should always have a plan, right? Like, I know when I made the leap and I sort of just said, okay, today's the day. But I had a plan, and I had a plan. If this doesn't work out, if I don't hit these milestones in the next 6 months, then, potentially this isn't right for me. So whether you have that plan while you still have a job, or you take the leap of faith because you're able to and you have the financial backing, you should still have a plan versus just, chasing it indefinitely and then not really getting to fulfill your purpose either way.
Right. So we've talked about a couple different types of transitions. Let's talk about another. Shirley from DC asks, how do you make the move from VP to C-suite? And I know this is something you have helped many, many people do to rise up in their organizations. Any advice for Shirley on that?
Yeah. So, that's a big question, right? You have to realize that when you're making the move and it depends on the company you're in, right? What VP means in one company is something very different in another, but essentially you're scaling up, right? From a VP standpoint, you are probably primarily, I don't know, your particular situation, but you're primarily focused on your function. And when you move into the C-suite role, you have two responsibilities. You're responsible for the function that you are the chief of, right? Let's say you're the chief marketing officer, but you also have a responsibility as being part of the executive team of thinking about the overall business. So one of the biggest things that I see people are missing as they try to make the leap from before being in the C-suite to the C-suite is that they don't have the overall business perspective. They haven't built the business acumen. So they might be a great marketing person, but they haven't really built their financial chops, right? And really understand how to understand the finances and the economics of the business or of the organization. So starting to think about the business more holistically and strategically rather than just through your own function is one of the biggest areas. I think the second is really being able to operate and navigate at the C-suite level in terms of with your peers. And that takes a lot of leadership presence, executive presence, how you communicate. And then the third is, again, depending on the size of your company, can you demonstrate that you can manage and lead others at scale, right? Because you now have amplified the number of people that you might need to lead and need to manage. And are you able to do that at that level where you're even though you might not be as hands-on as you were as a VP or as a manager, are you still able to move people towards a particular goal at that level? And so there are a number of other things, but those are probably the three areas that I see as the biggest hindrances from people moving into the C-suite level, and therefore what one should really look to build some muscle in and be able to demonstrate to position themselves that they're ready for the C-suite.
Yeah. I would also say one of the things I think holds a lot of people back unknowingly is that they never told anyone in their company that they want that role, right? They're doing their work. They're trying to do the things you say, right? Demonstrate, but they've never told their manager or their boss's boss that I want to move into the C-suite.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And I mean, this is where we also talk about sponsorship, right? Like I think, having a sponsor is inevitably one of the most important things that you can do in your career, and having multiple sponsors, quite frankly, and certainly to try to get into the C-suite, having a sponsor is a huge asset. And it starts by telling people what it is that you actually want to do, which brings us back to our first question. What is it that you want?
Right. And why do you want it? Right. And I heard you draw that question out as well.
Yeah.
We have a question from Sangram I love. How important are gut feelings during a career transition?
I think that gut feelings are important during a career transition and in many other areas of your career. It doesn't mean that you should solely go on gut. You want to weigh both, right? What you know from your experiences and the facts that you have and the data that you have. And then how does that inform what you think you should do, right? And what you think you should do, like the more eloquent way of saying gut feeling is what's the stake in the ground? What's the decision that you make? When we make decisions, they're informed based on data, based on facts, based on what we've done. But we're making a decision about the future without really knowing what's going to happen next. So can that come from your intuition and your gut? Absolutely. And so the more experienced you become, the more you start having pattern recognition, the more you start understanding, when I made a decision, that if you are learning from your past experiences, the more your intuition will become stronger. And so is it important? Yes. But make sure that you've cultivated it over time. You're not going to wake up one day and all of a sudden say, oh my God, I have great, I have great gut feelings or I have great intuition. It doesn't happen that way. I also think it's helpful if you have some trusted advisors that you then, have them kick the tire on what your gut feeling is, right? Doesn't mean you need to listen to it, but I am a strong believer in triangulating. Go ask a couple of people, hey, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? Okay. And listen. Doesn't mean you have to follow it, but at the very least, you get a chance to have other people check you on what you might be leaning towards.
Yeah. My husband, who's a therapist, as you know, has this great trick he uses. When I'm like, my gut is telling me to do this, he said, okay. And he'll tell me, you have to do it. You have to do it. This is what, and he's like, okay, how do you feel? right? And he's like, if that's your gut, if I'm telling you it's going to happen, how do you then react? And it's really helpful, because sometimes I'm like, oh no, I don't want to have to do it, right? And it helps me assess, is that gut feeling, actually valid? Does it, can I imagine doing what my gut is telling me to do?
Right. I mean, we could have, again, a whole nother conversation of how do you know if it's a gut feeling versus something else, right?
That's right.
But how your intuition speaks to you varies from person to person. But one thing I will say, it's never really loud. It's often pretty silent, and that's why. So you have to actually listen for it rather than it chasing you.
Yeah, that's really smart, especially because we all get so wrapped up in the day to day and what we're doing and the stress and the huge inbox and all of that, and it's hard to sort of pick our head up and listen.
Yeah. And I mean, Amy, what I'll say here though is it's also recognizing that whatever decision you make, it'll be okay, right? And most people fear that they'll make the wrong decision when it comes to their career. If you believe that there's always room for course correction, that this is no decision that you make is ever forever, even though you might feel like it's forever. And yeah, it might lead you on a detour, but that's okay. Detours still lead to somewhere,
Yeah.
And so I think at some point it's making the call, am I better off, whatever better off means for you, staying, right, and in what I know versus going to something that I don't know. And there's no right or wrong. It's just trusting that either way, it's going to lead you someplace, and you can then determine if that someplace is what's right for you at that time.
Yeah, and one of those transitions I think people make, and they fear it will not be able to be undone, is becoming a manager, right? Having a bigger team. And I know many people who moved into those positions and then were like, nope, this is not for me, and we're really struggled to get back to the individual contributor role.
Yes,
but it like you say, almost always those decisions are able to be undone, or you're able to pivot to something else.
Yeah. I mean, the struggle is because we're told that, success means moving up, and success means managing people, or success means working, in a certain environment. I mean, even when I made the switch from moving from a corporate world to being an entrepreneur, I remember most people said, are you crazy? Like, you have a nice corner office. You finally made it. You have people that you manage and make a great salary. Why would you ever do that and work out of your dining room? And I was like, well, those things aren't really important to me, but these other things are. So I followed that path. So I think you have to be really grounded around, why are you doing it? Because that's what's going to anchor you in whatever decision you make.
Yeah. We have a great question from Christine from New York City. How do you communicate your aspirations for a career transition with your manager? And I'm getting the sense, because she has this parenthetical, or should you, if they would view it negatively. So if you're talking about a transition out of that field or out of that company, is that something you talk to with your manager about?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it depends, right? Like, it depends on what is your relationship with your manager. Are they somebody who supports career development and career growth in whatever way is best going to serve you? And are they operating from that standpoint? Or is it a situation where they might view it as negatively, right? Obviously, if it's the former, it's a little easier, and you tell them and you share with them, and hopefully they partner and they support you, and they support you in making that transition. If your sense is that they view it as negatively, I think one of the things is, what is it that they're viewing negatively? Is it that you are leaving, or that you're making the transition? Or is it that they're concerned around the impact of your transition? And what I have found is that many times, particularly if you've been a good performer, the fear for the manager, or the concern, is more about the impact of that person leaving. And so if you're going to communicate it, I would be ready to communicate how your career transition, what you're going to do to make your career transition as easy as possible for the manager, right? How long you'll stick around, how you'll help groom people to take over your role, how you'll leave everything documented so nobody's left in a lurch, how you'll wait till another resource is on board. Obviously, things that are your control, but this is where you can partner with the manager. And I think going in with that spirit often helps allay the fears. you cannot control somebody else's emotions. So if they're disappointed, they're disappointed, right? What you want to make sure is that you're not exacerbating the disappointment.
Right. Yeah. And I think about the importance also that some managers put on loyalty. And I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if there's a way to communicate that conveys current loyalty, right? I'm not leaving tomorrow. I'm not quitting. This is not a quitting conversation. But that you're loyal to this company and this team right now, but you also have different, have aspirations for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an and, right? Just I can be loyal to you without necessarily being right next to you, and so it all comes down to all of our relative definitions of what loyalty means. But I think that that's what you convey. I can be loyal to you. I can support you. I'm just going to be doing it from over there instead of right here, right?
Yeah.
And so it's helping reframe what that change is going to look like, for that manager or for anybody else who's impacted.
Yeah. I put my difficult conversations lens on this also and think about how sometimes people are not, you might have a very good manager who you think will be supportive, but if they're not in the right mindset at that moment, you catch them off guard, they might panic, like, what, you're thinking about leaving?
Yeah.
I'm not a good manager. I'm not able to keep you, right? It could trigger all this stuff. And I wonder about setting up the conversation by asking them, like, what do you think about your career? Like in 5 years, what are you hoping to do? Right. So then they're in that mindset. And then you can say, oh, here's what I'm thinking about. Right.
Yeah.
So it's
I mean,
more
Amy, you bring up a great point too, which is it makes it much easier to have the career transition conversation with your manager if you've had career development discussions all along, right?
Yes.
But if your career transition conversation is like the first career conversation that you're having beyond your annual performance review, then yeah, it's probably not going to go as well because you haven't even had a chance to gauge how does your manager perceive your career and how you should be managing it. Career development conversations engages that person in partnering with you, hopefully, and supporting you. And then you have a better idea of how to, again, frame that message when it comes to that point. And knowing how they might react. And so you can prepare for that.
Yeah. I want to ask this question from Muriel from The Hague in the Netherlands. How do you find the best sponsor for yourself in your career? And do you need an internal or an external sponsor? You and I've talked a lot about this on the Women at Work podcast, and I know you think about sponsorship a lot. So curious what you think.
Yeah, so I think it's important to define what a sponsor is, right? And particularly how it differentiates from having a mentor. So if you think about a mentor is there to support you and to give you guidance and advice. A sponsor is there to do that and advocate and influence on your behalf, primarily through two ways: by getting you exposure to opportunities or getting you exposure to other individuals, all in the support of advancement in your career. And so there's a very specific role that a sponsor plays. And by advancement in a career, I don't mean promotion. Okay, that's not always what advancement means. Advancement is just moving, right? Moving to the next thing, growing, changing. So when you're looking for a sponsor, what do you need to make sure that there are people who actually can A, advocate on your behalf, and B, have the influence to help you make those moves, to give you that exposure. And so sometimes what we see a lot of is with mentors, people tend to seek out people who are like them, right? Which is completely natural. They can relate to them. It resonates with them. When it comes to a sponsor, that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. And often it's not, right? They need to be somebody who's in a position of power who, as I say, they have juice, okay? They have some chips that they can play on your behalf, and then they're willing to do it. How do you know if they're willing to do it? Again, I think it's important to cultivate those relationships. That can be done through a mentoring relationship. It can be done through somebody that you've worked with. If it's not somebody that you've worked with, at the very least that they have line of sight to you. And if your company happens to have a formal sponsorship program, that's another way of cultivating those relationships. Externally, I also think it's important to have sponsors so you can have them internally to help navigate where you're going inside an organization. Externally, they might be helpful in terms of you doing that within the industry. Or they might also be helpful in terms of the role that you have. Particularly if you have, like, for example, a sales role, you might have somebody in the industry who's a sponsor who helps open doors that then help you with your job internally. So getting a sponsor is extremely important. It takes some work. You cultivate it over time. You want to be strategic about it. And then you want to make sure that when you are in a sponsorship relationship, that you are making it easy for the sponsor to sponsor you. Right?
Yeah. So helpful. That's really great. Okay, I want to end on one question, one sort of tactical question from Elsa from Ottawa, who asks, are there any resources, books, or podcasts you recommend about making a career change?
Okay. Oh my goodness. Wow. This is catching me
First,
off guard.
I'm going to make a little plug for your podcast because I know in this, was it the most recent episode? There was
Yes.
an episode this season where you talked about helping someone through a career
Yes.
change.
So,
right?
so I will suggest my podcast, which is called Coaching Real Leaders, and is also affiliated with Harvard Business Review. And you can find it anywhere on HBR or on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. And we've had a couple of episodes about career change. One most recently, an episode that dropped this past Monday about transitioning into a new career and how do you prepare for that. And earlier this season, we had one on somebody who was looking to transition from being a specialist to a generalist. And we've had quite a few episodes on people looking to move into the C-suite. So definitely recommend that. And that's, again, called Coaching Real Leaders. I think that there is a great book by Scott Eblin called The Next Level, which really articulates well things that you should be thinking about, particularly as you're looking to transition at different levels of your career. So highly recommend that. It's kind of a classic. I think if you are looking for information on getting feedback and how, if there's anything specifically that you need to work on, Marshall Goldsmith's What Got You Here Won't Get You There is excellent, and highly recommend. So those are some of my favorites. I think if you are a woman, definitely listen to the Women at Work podcast, because they have great suggestions there on what to do.
Yeah, we did an episode last season about one specifically about a woman who was trying to make a big career move, but then also two women who were sort of boosted their career during the pandemic, which both of which would be relevant for folks. I will also say there's the HBR Guide to Changing Your Career, which is a very tactical book that's available as well. And perhaps we can drop that into the comments. Muriel, as always, this has been a pleasure. We could talk for hours about pretty much anything, but this was particularly fun. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So keep an eye on your inbox every Tuesday for our Management Tip of the Week LinkedIn newsletter. We'll announce our next LinkedIn Live there. And if you haven't subscribed yet, look for a link in the comments of this video. Thank you so much for joining us.